Hi everyone, hello and welcome to the final Beyond Books event of the year. To say I'm excited about this event is an understatement. I'm Nikki B from Civic Square and I'm the Programming and Participation Lead here. And thank you for joining us. Beyond Books is a virtual space at the moment, and hopefully when things have settled down with COVID, there'll be a physical space too. But Beyond Books is a space where we host voices that are often missed from the mainstream, voices that have narratives that we want to share and discuss. And it's a platform where we explore the role of books, reading and libraries. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hosting a conversation with the wonderful Derek Owusu with the equally wonderful Liz Pemberton. When I we hosted Derek last year at Impact Hub Birmingham, and I kind of looked up when that was, and it was only last April, but it feels like a lifetime away. And at that time, I'm just going to pick up a book. We hosted this fantastic collection of essays called Safe that Derek edited, and it was all about what it means to be a Black man in Britain today. And then not long after this event, actually no, a while after, it was towards the end of the year, Liz sent me a DM saying, wouldn't it be great if we could get Derek again? Because Derek had published last year his debut collection, the book that we're here to talk about tonight. That reminds me. And for various reasons, we never managed to get an event together at the time of publication, but I'm super excited that we were able to do it for the paperback. It was at that first event that we hosted with Derek at Impact Hub Birmingham when I thought there's something special about Derek's writing and his work that I thought, you know, whenever there's an opportunity to invite Derek again, there's definitely someone we'd like to invite again. So when Liz DM'd me, needless to say, I didn't need much persuasion. So just before I hand over to Liz, I'm just going to do a quick introduction of Derek and Liz. So Derek is a writer and poet from North London. He discovered his passion for literature at the age of 23 when he was studying exercise science at university. And then unable to change the direction of the degree he was studying, Derek decided to start reading voraciously and sneaking into English lectures at the University of Manchester. That's an interesting story I think we need to hear at some point, Derek. As I've mentioned already, Derek edited and contributed to the book Safe. And he was also 1/3 of the popular podcast trio Mostly Lit. And That Reminds Me is Derek's first solo book, and it was published by Merky Books. And it also, congratulations, it won the Desmond Elliott Prize this year. And then Liz, for those people who live in Birmingham, Liz is a familiar face. Liz is the director, also known as the Black Nursery Manager. She runs a training and consultancy firm which focuses on anti-racist practices, particularly within the early years. Liz has 16 years experience in the education sector. And one of the reasons we wanted Liz to host this conversation today was because of the narratives, particularly about Black boys and Black men and the work that Liz is doing. It seemed quite pertinent to have someone host a conversation who was familiar with some of the narratives in Derek's work, but also someone who's passionate about the issue. Liz's mission is to promote inclusive practice in the early years education sector, particularly with a focus on how race, culture and anti-racism should be considered in this practice. During her career, Liz has developed a fantastic network of like-minded practitioners and professionals, broadening her focus on nursery management to share her expertise through media and not letting the current COVID circumstances get in her way. Liz more recently has been starting creating online content on her Instagram page, which tackles some of these issues. And before I finally hand over to Liz, I just want to say thank you for joining us. We have partnered up with local independent bookseller Back to Brum Books. So if you haven't already got your copy of That Reminds Me, please do connect with Alexia, who can sort out a copy for you. There will be opportunity to ask both Derek and Liz questions. So please do make full use of the chat in the stage function. I can see people already saying hello. So ask questions away. And I'm sure there'll be time towards the end of the event to have questions answered. So I'm going to turn my camera and audio off and I'm going to hand over to Liz to have this conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being here to join me and Derek in conversation. Good evening, Derek. It's really nice to meet you, having been a long-time fan of your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I kind of want to start, obviously, at the beginning and think about how I came to your work or how I came to your writing. And that was through the collection of essays in Safe, the book that you edited, but also the book that you contributed an essay to, and some of the feelings that I had around the words that you had written and some of the imagery that you had created and the narrative that you'd built around Black masculinity that you invited others to share in constructing. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about how I felt when I read some of the essays, but also what that kind of spurred me to do in terms of my own thoughts and my own reflections. So first of all, I was blown away. And I say that with the most sincerity, because I'd never accessed a text which spoke to the Black British experience, the Black British experience that spoke about masculinity and manhood, and also Black men that I know and love, because in those essays, I saw every Black man. And so when I came into That Reminds Me, and I knew that that was, on its way, it was here, I consumed it. The first incarnation of that for me, I accessed it via Audible. So I got to hear the fantastic Cobner Holbrook Smith read That Reminds Me, and then latterly went on to kind of read the hard copy. And I just want to ask you how you felt in that, if you remember when you first thought about ideas that helped you to put together That Reminds Me and the character K, what were your first thoughts about K and who he was and how you were going to portray him?
So the first thoughts for K, they came from me and where I was at the time. I'd been, I guess, semi-institutionalized. So I was in a recovery house and I started writing the book as a way to try and understand how I got to that place, having a mental breakdown and being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. But I also wanted to understand how a person gets to that place, because I do find, and, a lot of people I've spoken to, the people I spoke to in the recovery house, one thing that they question and wonder is, what happened to me that brought me to this place? So I wanted to explore that and see if I could create a narrative that would lead to that, taking, I guess, minuscule moments from my own life and blowing them up and, creating fiction around them. See if I can do that, because of course we can't trust memories, and, the task of trying to look back in your life and figure out what was the moment where everything cracked, everything broke down. You're never going to be able to do that. You just never know. And usually it's something very minor. Of course, the straw that broke the camel's back. You never know what that moment is. But I still wanted to explore that in my writing. And I guess kind of create kind of like clues or kind of hints and things like that would make you think, okay, maybe it was this moment or that moment, or this is what happened. But of course, it is an accumulative effect. It's
definitely
many things happen. And many of those things happen during childhood. You live the first 7 years of your life. The Jesuit maxim is, give me the boy for 7 years and I'll give you the man. You go through childhood, and usually what happens is, everything that happens in your adult life is just kind of a reflection of what happened in your childhood. And that's why I really wanted to try and reflect. And of course, we don't remember a lot from our childhood as we get older. The closer we are to the age that we're talking about, the more we remember, and so on and so forth. So that's what I was really trying to do. And there's a lot of other things I was trying to do in the book. That was kind of like the overall thing. But as you get into a person's life, as I was, creating Kay as a character, I thought to myself, what are the memories that people would remember in a way that would reflect their adult life? Not just with mental health, just with everything.
Definitely.
The way they interact with people, their family, the world around them, the way they think, the way they behave, and all of these different kind of things, these questions, of course. came up as well. But I took a lot of inspiration. So once I came out of the recovery house, of course, I hadn't finished writing the book. I would just be out somewhere doing something and just, you know, you just pick up on something and you're like, this is a very poignant moment that I think somebody would remember. Not because it's important, you know, usually it's not important, but just because of the emotional effect that it had on you. And those are the things that I really wanted to write about, you know, the kind of mundane details of things as well, because if something poignant happens at a particular moment in your life, not even poignant, but something that's memorable to you, you then remember everything that came before, which is usually completely mundane. It's so innocuous, it doesn't mean anything. But that build up in terms of memory was important for me to put into the book, you know, just to give it that kind of sense of realism.
And you do that so beautifully. And one of the things that really struck me was the poetic nature of the book and the construct of the book, and particularly how you spoke about childhood, but that interweaving of Anansi throughout the book was something that really made me think, when I have this conversation with you, what I wanted to really look at was boyhood, was early childhood, and particularly those first 5 years of life. Based on the work that I do, you know, working with very, very young children, primarily Black children, primarily Black boys, there are a lot of things that happen in those first 5 years of life, like you said, that become quite fragmented, but then all seem to kind of come together in later life. And that's through adolescence, through adulthood. But as you said, a lot of that is a reflection back into early childhood. And one of the things that, as I said, you do so beautifully is use the poetic nature of childhood to talk about at times some really horrific things. But it's almost like that juxtaposition of the poetic nature. It softens the blow and then it makes it really intense. So the softening with Anansi, it lulls you into a story time. And I think that is one of the things that you do so well. So thinking about juxtapositioning Anansi as a story, which is very important, I would say, for the culture. When I say the culture, you know, being Black Caribbean, being Black African, the story of Anansi is something that runs through both of us. So the diaspora there is connected. But speak about why you chose Anansi as that thread to weave all of the chapters, if you like, together. I mean, of course, there's the obvious thing in terms of what you're saying about weaving a story together as a spider weaves its web. And that's what that reminds me, is it's weaving different moments together until you have the whole, and then you can look at it and say, okay, I understand what is here. But then it's also about Kay trying to connect with a culture that he was disconnected with at childhood, you know. And you say to anybody, like saying to anybody, you know, African, Caribbean, and Anansi the spider, more likely than not, they'll know what you're talking about. Even if they don't fully understand or they've never heard the stories, they know about Anansi the spider. Or if you're in, you know, if you're African American, you say Brer Rabbit, they'll know who Brer Rabbit is, though they wouldn't know that that's just obviously a transformation of Anansi into a rabbit that's been carried over via the, you know, the transatlantic slave trade. So I wanted that to be there, and I wanted to represent Ghana. I wanted to make sure that it was very, very clear, you know, that I was thinking about Ghanaians when I was writing this book. I was thinking about Black people when I was writing this book. You know, as famously Toni Morrison always says, is that when she was writing, she didn't want to be thinking about the white gaze. She didn't want to have to explain anything, you know, which is why I flat out refused to have like a glossary in the back of the book, say Anansi is this, that, or this phrase means this, that. Do you know what I mean? Totally, because that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, Black readers read it and they know that you're directly speaking to them. And that's not to say that I wasn't writing this for everybody. You know, to be honest, I was writing this for myself, but of course you want everybody to take something away from it.
Totally. And
Sorry. Go on.
I was just thinking the way that you access that in your own mind is that there is something very strong about the presence of Blackness, whether that be being Black and Ghanaian, or whether that be being Black and Jamaican. There's something that connects the diaspora, which centralizes our Blackness, that your book does so well. That storytelling nature then, and then the hard-hitting, really sometimes, as I said, distressing things that are presented in a poetic form. Was that something you've consciously thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. There are passages that I wanted to write in the book, and I had to sit down and say to myself, how do I write this in a way that will, I guess, kind of want me personally to keep reading? You know, I guess it wasn't about softening it, but it was just trying to create poetry out of, you know, the hardest of times that people can go through. You know, so I mean, I personally hate this phrase, this whole the beautiful struggle. I don't really like that phrase. But when I was writing, it was something that I was, you know, I was conscious of. And I think just by the kind of writer I am, I feel like I am a poet. I feel like, you know, although this is obviously a novel in verse, I would say that I'm a poet first, because I just pay so much attention to language and what it is that I'm trying to convey. I think about emotion before I think about plot. You know, I think about characterization, psychology before I think about anything else. Because I do feel like those things will carry a novel forward anyway, because, you know, we go about living our lives and we never think about plot. We never think about, well, I'm sure some people think about plot, like, oh, what's the, you know, what's the next motive? Where am I going after this and stuff like that? But everyday life is just about you just living it.
Yeah.
And your emotions are here or there. Your thoughts are all over the place and these kind of things. And one thing that we do all the time is we remember things. You know, when you're sitting down and you're thinking about things, you're usually thinking about what's to come or what came before. And in order to get to know someone, so I really wanted readers to get to know Kay as a person. And I honestly believe in order for you to know someone as a person, you have to know their past. It's like when you go on a date, you talk, you know, one of the first things people say is they're like, so tell me about your life. You know, and you have to recall what happened in your life in order for them to get an idea of who you are as a person.
Totally.
That's what it is. So that's why it was important for me to do and put an emphasis on the memory. You know, you read a lot of novels that go back in time or talk to you about, but they never say this is a novel about memories. But all novels are
about memory.
Exactly.
You know, when you were talking, I thought, you never forget how somebody makes you feel. And what you capture in this is so much feeling. And I think that's why the impact of the story of Kay from very early childhood, things that we may remember, but we've not understood what it's linked to. We remember how that made us feel. So there's a part at the start of the book where Kay talks about his journey in the car and going over bumps and the seatbelt being something that kind of kept him in place, but he was looking at the greenery of the land. You know, we knew that he was in the countryside, but we almost knew that this was kind of like a fragmented memory because it wasn't actually completed, but it was just almost like you're looking in to a section. And often childhood is like that, isn't it? You're looking into this small section and it's like, oh yeah, I remember the feel of the seatbelt. I remember going over a bump. I remember being in the countryside. So I think what I want to kind of invite you to do, Derek, is read just a small section from Awareness 5, which was the first point for me in the book where I felt something really profound. And it talks about hair. But, could I invite you to read that section, please?
Sure, of course. So this is when Kay is still in foster care. Dry, I felt no pain as I watched dense balls of fluff fall to the floor and my foster friend, brother really, sweep them up, eager to be involved. He'd experienced a few cuts, but now his head's covered in scabs, suppressed hair, cultural significance dried up. So every time someone was getting a trim, there he'd be, broom in hand, waiting for the 4C weeds to tumble to the floor. I once watched him put my hair in his pocket and inhale it behind the door. My scalp had some sores too, but but a plump tangle of my hair kept it a secret my 1A carers had no reason to wonder about. When the cut was over and I slid off the chair, immediately forgetting my fro, there were no puffs of hair to cushion my steps, the job of sweeping them away done so well. I felt lucky to only get the snips because I'd seen the fits of the suffering girls. Soft hair falling like floss, no fro to swell, white hands going into black hair but never acknowledging its curls.
There's just so much in that. And I think I said to you before, like, I'm going to get emotional and ignore me. But something about the politics of black hair, the strength of black hair, the power of black hair, the childhood association as well to black hair. These things kind of came to me, Derek, when I read that, and the disassociative way in which whiteness deals with blackness and black hair. And when you talked about, you know, it being a cushion, you know, the feeling of loss almost, it was really tragic. It felt tragic. It felt like a grief. That is how I felt. But then I also thought about the innocence of childhood, but also that connectiveness between an adult and a child when it comes to black hair. There's just so much in that small part that just really, it touched me, man. It touched me. And I wonder, were you, you know, do you know how powerful that section is? Did you know how powerful that was when you were writing it and having those fragmented memories put together?
No, you know, interestingly, I didn't really, you know, I knew what I was doing. And I always, whenever I write something, even if it's still like a rough draft, if I can sit back and say, okay, I got that out the way I wanted to, then I feel like I know that I've done something. Whether or not it's good or not, that's for readers to decide, you know. But yeah, absolutely. And I think the politics of black hair, especially when it comes to being in foster care, was something I was acutely, you know, aware of. I'd written about it before as well. And one thing that I wanted to highlight, you know, not just in this book, but in when I talk and things like that, is that, you know, white foster carers who take on black foster kids, in their minds, they have the best intentions. You know, I'm taking this black boy, this black girl out of foster care and I'm giving them a home. Not bothering to do the research, you are erasing them in a way because the culture is different. And not even just the culture is different, you know. You know, when people say, oh, you know, we're all one people, you know, we're all human beings. Okay, yeah, we are human beings, but my hair needs different care to yours. My skin needs different care to yours. You need to know, you know, more. You need to be more aware of if I carry the sickle cell trait and things like this, or am I more prone to diabetes? What food am I eating? And all of these kind of things, you know, that they don't care to look into, which they should do at the end of the day. So, you know, I mean, you know, coming away from, you know, Kay, but even speaking about my own experiences, that when I was in foster care with, you know, like a white middle class family, my hair, you know, I have real curly hair, like, you know, real tough hair. My afro was being cut with scissors.
Matching.
So it's like, how were you ever going to cut my hair properly? Nothing was being put in my hair. My skin wasn't being moisturized. I do remember one young boy in foster care who I used to always remember him with his shirt like this, rubbing his shirt around his skin because his eczema was so bad. And my foster care didn't know what to do. She didn't know how it happened. She didn't know what to do to help him. And he just used to always do that. I just how I remember him on my mind. Just
these fragments.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So there's one thing they definitely, and this is why I really wanted to emphasize in the book, and I'm glad that I did it well in that sense. So hopefully if, you know, a white foster carer is reading the book and they read that passage, they can think to themselves and be like, oh, okay,
Totally.
Yeah, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely, because it comes back to the censoring of whiteness and decentering whiteness when it comes to fostering and adoption and thinking outside of what whiteness has created, which is the norm, and everything outside of that is othered or has to be not considered. And it actually really does have to be considered. And I think when we're speaking about childhood, when you're speaking about boyhood, when you're speaking about what it means to be a Black child,
yes,
through the lens of white carers, do-gooders, this intention means nothing, because the actuality of it is that harm is being done. And that is what you cover so poignantly, the harm that you spoke about, that hair situation, and even you talking about, eczema. These are fragmented memories, but even for myself as a long-suffering, eczema person, that when you said that about the shirt rubbing, that stimulated something in me, because that was a memory that I had often coming back from school, and the collar of my white shirt was always bloody because the whole day I'd spent just like rubbing it against my neck. And so, I knew that when I went home, I had E45 at the time, but I would always remember my mom making sure I had a tub of E45 to take to school so that it got dry throughout the day. And it's those little things that mean so much. And you capture that when you talk about the fact that these are things that are often forgotten in the good intention of wanting to just love a child or offering them a good home. So I just thought, that was very, very powerful. One of the other themes around that early childhood was, of course, being in foster care and being in the foster home, but this reconnection with Kay's reconnection with his birth mother, and this introduction to a new world, if you like, Kay's introduction to life outside of the countryside. Can you kind of talk about why it was important for you to draw on that difference between, the town and the country? Because it felt very important, and it linked in with a few themes for me from different authors and different things that I've read, quintessentially British and quintessentially English things. In other words, very white writing, the town and the country.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I was conscious of when I was writing about, Kay being in foster care was that, there are many stories about, Black children being in foster care that are out there. You know about Lem Cisse's story, about Alex Wheatel's story, and these are very tragic stories, and they're so important. These things need to be told. But I always think that when there's one narrative, there needs to be another to juxtapose it. So, I wanted to write Kay's time in foster care, obviously seen through the eyes of a child, that it was almost idyllic. It was almost nice. It was like, I'm in the countryside, and there's horses, there's grass, and there's this and there's that. I'm having birthday parties and all these kind of things. To then come to London, which to many people who are from the country seems very harsh, very, very different, very loud, and it's just, it's unbelievable. I always remember, firstly, when I went to Ghana when I was 16, one thing that always fascinated me was that when people buy drinks from like a shop or something, they drink it, they don't throw the glass away. They put the glass back somewhere and take the glass back to the shop. Do you know what I mean? And it's like that scene from Coming to America, where he picks up a piece of glass and he says, imagine a country so free where they can throw glass on the street. Do you know what I mean? And I thought about that, and I thought to myself, you know what? I don't remember anybody just kind of throwing trash out when I was in foster care. Do you know what I mean? So that allowed me to access a kind of truth in terms of being in the countryside. So those little truths, and I was able to just kind of put them in there. But yeah, and I think it was kind of, in terms of the way I tried to put those two together, was also to try and emphasize that things were about to change for Kay. Things are about to be very different. The culture's changed, yeah. The environment has changed also. The mind state has changed. He's, looking back on his life with people who are not actually his biological parents and seeing that as a better life for himself. But obviously as the book progresses, that's not exactly how it is, yeah.
Of course. And so I think another thing that really kind of struck me about that transition into, city life, into London life, into Tottenham life, being in North London is a different kettle of fish, but also how then Kay accesses what we would understand to be blackness. Kay's accessing blackness at that age. He's still in his formative years. He's finding out who he is, where he fits in. And some of the things that kind of jumped out were places where you'd written about school children noticing how Kay dressed as a signifier for him being cool or not cool, or, man them or not man them. And I think it's really interesting in that is it really forms very early on how we access our identity, or how we access our blackness within what I would say, are inner city spaces. And every city has an inner city space. So in reading about Broadwater Farm, in reading about Tottenham, I was able to access Birmingham, there weren't too many kind of things that were different. There were a lot of similarities, a lot of things, but you touch on Kay then wanting to be a part of something that he didn't quite know how to access, and some of those difficulties that he had in year 6. So before he went to secondary school, that last year of primary school, how it felt. Can you kind of explain why that particular period of Kay's life was important to document, that transition into kind of like being a baby, if you like, into nearly being a teenager?
Yeah, absolutely. One, I feel like, people remember the transition, from one era to, you call it era, one era to the next, And obviously Kay coming from the countryside, which was one culture, and then to Broadwater Farm, another culture, but then getting into primary school and realizing that the culture he thought he's now accessed is not actually it. So the fact that, other Black students would refer to him as an African, and then, internalizing that, and this again comes from something that I was aware of. A lot of people are aware of, but a lot of people deny it, which is really strange.
It's strange, isn't it? How people like to remember.
Yeah, it's very odd, But the fact of the matter is that in the early 90s, going to school, mid 90s, going to school, if you were African, you weren't actually considered Black.
Nah.
Caribbeans, West Indians were considered Black.
Yeah.
Africans were considered African.
Yeah.
And so, we were bullied in school.
Yeah.
A lot of people pretend that they were like from Jamaica, or if they could somehow find the most obscure island that no one would even question. I'm from St. Vincent, do you know what I mean? and say that from there. And this is what it was like. So I wanted to really capture that, to show that, okay, there's a conflict going from what we would call white culture into Black culture, but then within Black culture, there are also clashes in there as well.
Yes.
That's one thing that I really wanted to highlight. But then also at the same time, you've been in school for, 3 years. You've been in, like, kind of from year 4, year 5, year 6. Yeah. Those years are important. When you get into year 6, you feel like you're a big boy. You're top of the school.
Of course.
Then you have to go to secondary school and you're at the bottom again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that can have a toll on you. So you remember, it's almost like nostalgically you remember what it was like to be at the top. in those moments as well, and how people treated you and so forth. And I do think those years as well, though I said, the first 7 years, from year 3 to year 6 as well, those years are really pivotal, because you go into secondary school into year 7, and so a lot of the time how you're perceived in year 7 is how you carry on into year 11.
Yeah.
So from what I can remember, the boys in year 7 who were popular or this is that, they were still popular in year 11.
Totally.
They were still the top boys. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's why I feel like those years are, that transition period is very important. Not just in school. One thing that I do regret, not regret, but I wish I did more, and I'll probably explore in another book, was that school life, like what it was like to be in primary school and then enter year 7.
Yes.
That transition, what it was like, how it felt, you get into year 7, not many people actually cared anymore whether you were African or whether you were from, whether you're West Indian, because it's a lot more multicultural, especially if you're coming from Tottenham as well. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot different.
Of course. And I think the way that you deal with that interconnectedness, within the diaspora, it's really true what you say. I was in school in the 90s and I was happy that I was of Jamaican heritage. It wasn't even about being West Indian. My parents are Jamaican and I go to Jamaica regularly. And anybody that was a shade darker than me, she must be African. And that was just the narrative that carried on throughout the whole of my adolescence, certainly. But there was always this interest in, I think, we started to explore colorism and notions of belonging is attached to colorism. And as we got older, for me, particularly when I went to university, I went to De Montfort in Leicester, and it was the first time that I was a minority within my diaspora. There was nobody else that was of Jamaican heritage. Everybody at that point then was Nigerian, Ghanaian, or from Sierra Leone. And so it was very interesting, me being on the other side of that although I was perceived as being brown-skinned, I was then referred to as just being a Jamo. And it was really kind of shocking to me to kind of be like, oh, okay, well, all this time I've been kind of held up as somebody that was very important. I was the coolest. And now I'm in a place where I'm the only person who is of West Indian heritage, specifically Jamaican heritage. And that was a really big culture shock. And it's not something that's often explored in literature. And that's why I think it's so beautiful that in that section, when you speak about Kay being in year 6, having his first kiss, being perceived as, a tramp, being bullied. There are little things that you say that make me think, for Kay, that's so relatable. But how often do I see that written? How often is that transition spoken about? I think it's a good point to kind of invite you to read that little section there about Kay and that part for reflection. Too.
Sure.
I think it captures it.
My first day of school, a boy in year 6 asked me if I'm a rude boy. I'm not rude, I think, and carry on watching the girls play marbles, waiting for the right moment to ask if I can join. I have a cat's eye, but they ask how I can see through my dark skin. On the second day, the only student who will talk to me tells me to undo my shirt's top button, roll up my sleeve and walk with a bop. There's no official school uniform, but secondhand shirts and trousers are cheaper than tracksuits, so I always look smart and ready to learn. And this, the boy informs me, makes me a bod. The transformation helps. On the third day, a girl in year 6 takes me around the corner, cups my face and kisses me. Her lips are soft, and as they press against mine, it feels like nectar from the pressure is trickling down my chin to branch off inside my chest. And suddenly, I love London best. After a few weeks, my classmates are less hesitant to talk to me, and soon even my teachers can address me without smirking at my clothes, my clogged shoes, or my constantly split bottom lip. I'm told my breath smells like an African. I take the insult with baptized eyes, seeing who I am, unable to rebut because as I lift my hand to cup my mouth, I can smell last night's soup still on my fingertips. It's past lunchtime, so I lick them clean, unsure if I'm trying to savor the taste to subdue my speaking stomach, unsatisfied with the ham sandwich packed for lunch, or I'm embarrassed, revealed to be an African who eats with his hands. Some days I try to play football, but I'm never picked because I do something called toe punt. So I sit behind the goal and dig a stick into the grass, trying to create a grave for the ants that pass by. Maybe I'll join their march. I'm still in love with the girl in year 6. A teacher caught us pressed together behind a skip, and I haven't seen the girl again. I'm in year 3. So now I just play with my sticks, watch the boys running after the football, and think about the next person who wants to be my friend.
Childhood, Black boy, childhood, and that memory of ants. Because when you think about how ants move, and sometimes, you know, in the work that I do, I often see children sitting down and just observing nature and just looking at what's happening in these kind of moments of ants, wasps, ladybirds, just the fascination with how they move. And you flitting back to that in that section, which comes off the back of this realization about identity and this association to being African, what that meant at that time, and how you check in with Kay's character in terms of how Kay reckons this in this journey for year 6, knowing as the reader, Kay's got year 7 to go. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't even the start of anything. Like, there's so much again that you capture in terms of emotion. And that really kind of, for me as the reader, I really empathized with Kay. I really felt guilty for perpetuating some of that behavior when I was in secondary school. And even though I was not, I would say, consciously aware of the damage it was doing, I knew it wasn't very nice to refer to somebody as African. You know, in my kind of woke years, because everybody's woke now, everybody knows, everybody's got a consciousness about Blackness. As you said, people like to forget and erase their history and their journey through finding themselves. So when you spoke about Kay lifting up his hand and smelling or tasting the soup from the night before, that again, I think is a nod to Ghana. It's a nod to identity and incorporating food. Why was that important to incorporate or have these nods to Ghana throughout the book for Kay? Why was that important?
I think I just, you know, I really feel like me personally, I'm trying to connect, you know, with Ghana as well. So if I could connect with a Ghanaian reader, that would be amazing as well, you know. There's obviously a real conflict when you're born in the UK. It's like, are you Black British? You know, you meet someone, you meet a contemporary who's Black as well. They say, where are you from? It's very unlikely you'll say Tottenham or Brixton, you know, or I'm from Leicester, I'm from Birmingham. You'll say, I'm from Ghana, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Jamaica, you know. But if you go to Ghana or Jamaica and they say, where are you from? You say London, oh, I'm from Birmingham. I'm gay. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a very tricky situation. But I really just wanted to, you know, so even when I was writing that passage, I knew that being said that people saying to you that, oh, you smell like a particular country, is just not something that's exclusive to Ghanaians. You know, I remember reading this verse somewhere, and a young woman came up to me. I think she was from Bangladesh, and she was like, you know, when you read that, I really felt it, because that used to happen to me all the time as well. You know, and this is, I'm aware of this because Ghanaians are not the only people who eat with their hands. You know, who eat with, you know, and the soup that they eat is really strong smelling. Do you know what I mean? And that's just how we cook. But obviously in this country, to smell like food, especially strong smelling food, you smelling like Maggie cube or curry powder, it's not the one. You know, I remember when I was like 18 and I'll be about to go to a rave, My mom's downstairs cooking. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to run through the house, because if I don't run, the smell's gonna get on my coat. I can't go to the rave smelling like
Well, it's true. You know, these connections and these, again, fragments of our own coming of age, like the raving element of our lives. I'm 38, right? And so, like, for me, De Montfort, uni, all my memory is of raving. I remember no lectures at all. I remember raving. I remember being my best self, having my own place to live. You know, I don't remember that English and theatre degree, not at all. Not at all. But this fragment of, you know, who I was and who I think I was, two different things. And it's kind of like with Kay in this book, who Kay is being told he is and who he actually is. As we go through the story of Kay, he finds himself as he goes through these different hurdles, these different experiences. But at this point in the book, he's being told who he is. And it made me think how much of who we are told we are stays with us throughout our lives, depending on what stage we are told we are that person.
Absolutely.
You know, when you spoke about going to Ghana at 16, was there a feeling that you wanted to stay longer than you were there, or did you yearn to come back to the UK? How did you feel?
Oh, I wanted to come back. I wanted to come back.
Derek, you fraud.
I know. When I went to Ghana for the first time when I was 16, I was there. I think I was there for 5 days, and I just thought, I can't do this for another 25 days. I think one, because I was 16. I had to obviously follow my uncle around, and though of course I wanted to connect with being Ghanaian, I've just had a revelation just now. I wanted to connect with being a British Ghanaian. And I think that's what it was. I think the Ghanaians in Ghana were too Ghanaian for me at that time. You know, whereas, and it's like I write in that reminds me when, it's so weird that I wrote this and I've now realized it myself personally, is that, you know, when Kay was young and he was watching the older Ghanaian boys speaking Tree, the bad boys of the estate, you know, not embarrassed by the fact they're speaking another language. And he was kind of like, oh my God, I want to get in on this. But of course, what he wanted to get in on was being Black British, but also being Ghanaian at the same time. Totally. When I personally went to Ghana, there was no Black British. It was just, you're full Ghanaian. That's it. This is the culture. There's no, you know, there's no fusion of cultures here. You know, we're going to sit down. We're not going to watch Only Fools and Horses. We're going to watch something Ghanaian, you know, we're going to watch a Nollywood movie. Yeah. And at 16, you're just like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. Like, do you know what I mean? Whereas now, obviously, you know, I'm 32 now. If someone puts on a Nollywood movie, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Let's watch. But at 16, you don't want to do that. It's you know, I feel like it's an accumulative effect. You want to be more Black British Ghanaian, Black British Ghanaian. Then it gets to the point where you're like, I just want to be Ghanaian, man. Sometimes it's too late. One, because you can't speak the language. And I personally believe that language is the key to a culture. You know, I always feel, no matter how Ghanaian I will feel, because I can't speak Tree, I feel like I'm locked out of a particular, because language shapes culture. Language is culture. Do you know what I mean? There's cultural references that I don't understand. It's the same with my mom. English references, she won't understand. If I say to her, if I use a turn of phrase or a particular idiom, you know, or a metaphor, she looks at me like, what are you talking about? Or if I ask her to translate something into English from Tree, she sits there and she's just like, I can't actually do it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's so important. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent.
No, I really enjoy that tangent because it is about language and the evolution of language and how language shapes us and the access to that. And also something to say about education, class, reading. And I know that there's something here about how you yourself as Derek, how you got into reading, how you got a passion for literature. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, of course. So I got into literature at the age of 24. You know, I didn't go to uni at 18. I just didn't think I could do it. I thought I was didn't have the smarts to do it, and I got kind of tricked into going to university by one of my cousins who literally applied for the unis for me, got his sister to write my personal statement, drove me to the unis, and he was kind of like, I'll pick you up when you graduate. And then I had a lecturer called Colin Robertson, and I was studying exercise science because I was a personal trainer at the time. And he said, you know, go and read some classes, go read some Dickens or whatever, and because it'll get you into the habit of reading research papers because you just be reading all the time. You know, at that point, I mean, I had obviously come across like non-fiction books, you know. I mean, you always get this in publishing where they say, you know, black men, black boys don't read. That's rubbish. We do read, but the majority of black boys read books that they think are going to improve their lives. They read self-help books, you know. I always say this, it's very unlikely you're going to come across a black man, working class black man, who's never heard of the 48 Laws of Power. Yeah, or The Alchemist, or Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Because they feel like these are self-improvement books. They want to get out of the situation that they're in. They see novels like storybooks or whatever. Sorry, what was this? Yeah, so I decided to go down to the library and pick up some novels, you know. So I picked up a novel by D.H. Lawrence, a short story, and I read it, and I was just blown away by the language. I was really, you know, and at this point I was really into like Nas and kind of like rappers who were like lyricists who took pride in the lyrics and stuff. So I read that and I was blown away. So I read more of these short stories, and I just started reading the classics. You know, I was reading like a lot of Oscar Wilde, D.H. Lawrence, Ian Forster, H.G. Wells, and those kind of people, just really getting into them. And then it just developed from there. It just built from there. From there, I just fell in love with reading. And it got to the point where I would feel physically uncomfortable if I hadn't read something that day. You know, wow. I would wake up before uni, be like, okay, let me read 50 pages of this book. Before I know it, I've read 150, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm late for my lecture. Go to my lecture. Yeah, just really, you know, I wish I could relive that moment where I don't even know what passage it was in the short story by D.H. Lawrence or what it was, but it was an amazing feeling. Like the words and everything just came alive for me. And it was just great, you know, and it was even better when I discovered, like, you know, because obviously these are like dead white male authors. Yeah. And I started with those classics, but, you know, another pivotal moment when I discovered Ralph Ellison, African-American author, and I read Invisible Man. I was just like, oh, this is... That
was like another level unlocked.
It was another level, man. That book for me just felt like this is the... Because at the time I was like a real serious Pan-African. So I was like, this is the blueprint.
Yeah.
Pan-African. That's what it felt like when I read it. And, you know, from then I was just absolutely obsessed with it.
You had that thirst for literature. And then, as I said, you unlocked that other level, getting into Black consciousness. So I guess we had a lot of things imported from the US as well. So getting into the autobiography of Malcolm X, reading Baldwin, obviously Ellison, and then going back and perhaps looking and exploring the Harlem Renaissance, or looking at Langston Hughes's work, or perhaps looking at Zora Neale Hurston. So all these things kind of help to construct our identity as global Black, you know, people. And it's so interesting because when you speak about this, your journey actually wasn't quote unquote traditional, but you still accessed literature that was deemed to be classic because it was written by dead white men, and it still it awakened something in you. And that's very interesting because it's not a normal story, is it? It's not a story that we tend to hear. As you said, when you started talking about Black men talking and reading the 48 Laws of Power and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like I laughed and nodded because I know that well. That's every boy that I dated. They're books that were on the bookshelf and they thought they were a scholar, and I was at uni studying English. So I was like, you know, is that really what everybody is reading who looks like this? So tell me a bit about your kind of experience for for school education and teachers' expectations on your ability to learn? What did that do for you?
You know what? I had a terrible experience with teachers. You know, well, no, you know, it's interesting because you watch those movies like Freedom Writers and Dangerous Minds, and there's like that one teacher who really believes in the student stuff, and we laugh at it. But that does happen. I mean, it happened to me, you know, with this lecturer who told me to go and read some, you know, classics and stuff. And I'm still in touch with him. We're still talking. You know, he came to my launch event for That Reminds Me.
Wow.
And he was in the front of the audience. And afterwards he came up to me like, I'm so proud of you. Do you know what I mean? He was like, I knew you were going to be a writer. So that does happen, you know. But when I was younger, you know, I used to write stories, like really long pages and pages of like stories. Obviously didn't make sense or anything like that. But I remember I wrote a 10-page story and I was so proud of it. And I said to I had this odd thing with my handwriting. I don't know if this still happens to young people. I don't know why, but when I would write, I would get closer and closer to the margin. So it was like, it would get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And I remember showing that to my year 4 teacher at the time. I was like, Miss, I've written this story. And she was like, your handwriting is terrible. She's like, your handwriting is so bad. And I was just like, oh, okay. She didn't read it. She's just like, handwriting's bad. Cool. I mean, obviously I was upset by that. But then in the assembly, the next day, she was talking about what the students can do to improve themselves and better themselves. And she was like, and some of you really need to improve your handwriting. There's a student in my class whose handwriting is terrible. And then, you know how they used to do an assembly where everyone would turn and look.
Yeah.
She's talking about Derek. And then, I was just kind of like, oh God, okay. So I must be, I feel like that was the moment where I really thought to myself, I must be stupid, or I can't write. So I didn't write again from that point. But then in year 6, I had a teacher called Miss Harry, who halfway through year 6, you know, I was messing around. I was the joker of the class. For some reason, she just said to me, like, she didn't even say to me, she just started being really nice to me and told me, how are you, Derek? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Talking to me about this, that, and the other. Like, if I got a question right, she would come up to me and be like, Derek, how did you know that? Like, she would start talking to me like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I like Miss Harry. So I wanted to impress her more and more. So I actually started like studying. And then when the SATs came around, I remember I got 444, and I think 5 was the highest.
Yeah.
And then she came up to me and she said to me, she was like, Derek, imagine if you had applied yourself from the beginning, you would have got 555. Because she's like, but I'm still proud of you, and I'm really happy that you got this. You know, do you know what I mean? And teachers like that are just, you know, invaluable. Like she was amazing. So yeah, you know, that was the theme.
Yeah.
People believing in me more than I believed in myself.
Absolutely. And that teacher expectation is so important, particularly in the work that, you know, I do in education. When I see that expectations are low for Black boys, I see what that does to their self-esteem and their belief about how they can kind of progress through life, not just through academia. But I think it's really interesting that you look back and think, as you were doing when you were retelling that story, oh yeah, that was the moment when I was like, my handwriting's terrible, there must be something wrong with me. Yeah. But you recognize that you were like running out of space. So you were just wanting to carry on that sentence. And that the teacher had focused on the aesthetic of your handwriting, which is still very much something that's done now, you know, instead of the content of what you had written.
Yeah.
You still, as a 32-year-old man, you remember how that felt. And again, it links back to these fragments, all these things that make up who we are at different stages in our lives, or what triggers those memories. Somebody said, it'd be great if you said the uni teacher's name again. What was the university teacher's name?
His name was Colin Robertson.
Robertson.
Yeah, he taught at the University of Bolton. I think he's written a novel himself. I think
wow.
He's coming out soon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think you didn't get into education, Derek? Why did you not go into teaching? Did you ever think about or consider being an English teacher?
Oh, it's funny you say that, because I do plan to do that. I plan to do a master's next year in creative writing, and I want to teach creative writing.
Yeah.
I definitely want to teach. I mean, I think once I have a master's in creative writing, I could probably teach primary, maybe secondary English or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to do that. I love to be able to talk to, young people on a level about literature. No rubbish, no airs, no you have to, take on this kind of persona when we're talking about the classics and stuff like this. I would love to just be able to say to a student, well, did you think this was crap? Tell me why it was crap. Why is this rubbish? Do you know what I mean? Just, I feel like, because look, a lot of books are intimidating for people. Young people who study English literature a lot of the time and then go to uni and they decide they don't want to study English anymore. You say Shakespeare to them and they shudder like, oh God, I studied that in for A level, and it was just this, it was just that, and you know what I mean? And these kind of authors, they're I can't even lie. Look, I don't think people like Shakespeare and that are important now.
Yeah.
Important to developing the canon, the Western canon in English.
Yeah,
absolutely. But to say that nobody now has written as comprehensively and as detailed and as emotively as Shakespeare is a lie, in my personal opinion.
And mine too, Derek. We share that opinion.
Yeah. So I think that to be able to say, I think to be able to have a teacher who doesn't salivate and venerate these dead white males, I think it'll be good for students, because then they won't be afraid to share their opinion. And what people that age love to do is give you their opinion.
Absolutely. And I thought about how powerful would it have been if Safe was one of the texts that needed to be read, this collection of essays by Black men, how impactful it would be to have. That reminds me as the text that you must read, statutory texts. Who decides what is the canon of literature? Again, it's about this lens, isn't it, of white supremacy, the lens of who gets to say what is good and what is not. And you talking about wanting to be that teacher, the cool teacher, the teacher that people can relate to, that is key, because children learn when they can relate to the educator. They learn best when they know that the educator has their best interests at heart. And it isn't to say that they have to be from the same ethnic, racial, cultural background, but they do have to have a willingness to want to bring that child out of themselves. So when you spoke about that teacher being really nice to you, Miss Harris, saying, this is really good, Derek, well done. Again, you remember how that made you feel. And it pushed you, I guess, to wanting to do more, to impress her, to make her see your full potential. And so these things for Kay, I thought about in the book where Kay, it's a bit later on in the book, and I wasn't actually going to speak about it, but it just made me think about when Kay has this interaction with a girlfriend. There's a bit of a cheeky sex scene in there, but there's a talking about wanting to belong and how tender Kay was in that moment when he sees her naked body in the light and strokes her hair, and all of these things that are quite sensitive and also quite romantic, like that romanticized version of sex, that it wasn't just a sex scene, it was about romantic tenderness and this, I guess, this other dimension of Kay that we hadn't seen before, when there were other references to sex in the book. The part of being kissed in year 6 and being pushed up against the skip and, all of these things. There's a different side of Kay that we see, which often happens obviously in adolescence or a little bit older, this exploration of Black masculinity when it comes to love and romantic elements, sensitivity. I wonder when Kay reaches that point in the book when, he's in that scene of making love. Why did you include that in the book? Why was that important for you to write that into Kay's story?
Which scene, sorry?
The scene when he is making love, when he's with his girlfriend later on in the book, towards the end. You wrote about it being quite sensitive. It wasn't a sex scene, right? This is just about sex. It was about all of those elements that people would associate with love, but it was a tender side of Kay. So I just wondered why did you want to write that in?
I wanted really to contrast that with another part that I wrote where, it's quite obvious that Kay is having sex with somebody and he's not enjoying it. He's thinking about other things and he's worrying about his performance. He's worrying about, the size of his masculinity, I'll call it here, not to be too vulgar. These kind of things, and then how tender it is when it's just kind of like it's relaxed and it's just one-on-one with somebody. And again, that was obviously me trying to really bring to the fore symptoms of BPD, where it's more just about wanting to belong and not feel like somebody's going to abandon you, and just be close to somebody and love somebody. But it's important, because from my personal experience, when I'm talking to like Black working class guys, and they're talking about if they've been with somebody and whatnot, they always feel like they need to just pump up what they're saying and just kind of this kind of hyper masculine kind of this bravado, talking about, it was like this and it was like that, and then if you say to them, so what did you guys lay together in bed? Did you hold hands? Were you hugging? They're like, what kind of guy you forgot? What do you mean? But that probably did happen.
Yes.
They keep it to themselves because they don't feel like as men they should be saying all of that.
Totally.
I wanted to do away with that crap, all of that rubbish. Do you know what I mean? Like, be able to say when you're in love with someone, you're in love with them. You love your wife and all this kind of thing. You love your partner. We spend intimate moments together, and it's nice, and I like it because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we like tenderness. We love those things. So it was important for me to put that in there and contrast it with the crudeness of being forced to have sex or feel like you have to have sex, to it happening naturally, but you wanting to just be close to a person. There's wanting to be close to a person and have them close to you and hold them. Do you know what I mean? To just, you know what I'm saying anyway.
Absolutely, Derek. And I think I wanted you to speak to it because of this way in which Black masculinity has been shaped and has been framed. When we're reading about it or when we're accessing it through the media or whatever, people outside of, our communities may look at Black masculinity differently. And I thought that scene was written really nicely because it did lean into a vulnerability. A vulnerability that is last seen perhaps in Black boyhood. So when you talked about that scene about Kay looking at the ants, there's a vulnerability there because you imagine that Kay is just sitting down, making sure that there's a path for those ants to crawl in, an absolute innocence and a vulnerability. And that vulnerability and innocence revisited when you talk about that love-making scene, it brings you back again. It's this fragmented thing of thinking about another way in which Black masculinity is framed and why it is important to frame Black masculinity like that as well. Even though we know that, as you rightly said, when you're talking to your boys, and they're talking about sex, it's only delivered in one way, unless it's your article brethren who's going to be like, no, I feel like I love her, or, little different. We are all privy to those conversations, but the description of lovemaking, it's so important. And as I said, it was so nice to kind of read it and to hear it being read as well. Yeah. I am aware of time, but I do want to think about reflection 14. I'm just getting my book. But this part here, kind of, I thought about what it means again to be a child, to be a boy, and to think about fatherhood and parenting, motherhood. There's some things that this part kind of touches on. And I just wondered, could you read reflection 14 out and we can have a little conversation about that?
Yeah. Sure. The first friend I allowed in my house ran back to tell our class I was poor. They saw my mum and dad's mattress lying on the uncarpeted floor, homeless, unsupported, the framework having fallen apart, with sheets seeming to drag along like a drop flag gliding through an ocean of scattered clothes. When we bickered in school, my living conditions were his weapon of choice. Although the house didn't smell of spice, curry powder, or Maggie, the white boys of the area instead mocked the visible tinge of black that stained the bottom of our inner circle, the inner curtains. They were there when we moved in, and I suspect it's this unwillingness to change them, maintained by financial difficulties, that led the old woman from 5 doors down to knock at ours and inquire about her friend. In our garden, we had a bomb shelter, fascinating to me, but really a reminder of how soon the house might crumble. Suitcases longing for their promised flight to Ghana waited patiently next to little bags full of sardines that kept guests company in our living room, distracting them from the black mold that gathered in the corners of our ceiling. Still, nobody left our home without a story of relative poverty to relay. The truth is, we were all black working class, but pretending we couldn't relate.
So when you think about parenting, family, home life, intersections of class, race, friendships, community, again, this is why I think your writing is so powerful, because it is a relatively short prose, but it covers all of those themes and all of those feels. And you're picking up on mold, picking up on what it means to be black and working class, picking up on this, always a desire to perhaps, get on that flight, go to Ghana, the suitcase is packed, but that's next to the little shopping bag, because that's where Kay's family shopped. That's where Kay's mom went to the shop. It's all of these things in one. And I think when you were thinking about scenery and the imagery that you wanted to create for the reader, when you describe those things for Kay's home life, what were you saying about Kay's parents? What were you saying about Kay's mom?
Well, I really wanted to just kind of get home, and I think a lot of African readers or West Indian readers who will read this will understand that our parents are always in constant preparation to go back home. Do you know what I mean? And if that means you've got something, or they've got like suitcases in the house, they've got a trunk in the house, and you're just kind of like, well, what are you going to do? Don't touch it. I'm going to send it back home. It's been there for 4 years. It's still not back home yet. Do you know what I mean? Those kind of things are just, I feel like a lot of people could definitely relate to that. Yeah. So it's important that, that I put that in there. But also, in terms of like contrasting, the white boys of the area mocking the house and all of these kind of things, and his friends in school mocking him as well. What would happen is that, one thing that I personally experienced was that, and I only realized this when I was older, is that we're all living in the same area, or living on a council estate or, council housing and stuff like that. But what would happen is that because immigrant families were sending money back home, saving money to go back home, these kind of things, the culture was different. So the spending habits were different. Yeah. Because the immigrant families weren't spending obscene amounts of money on their children to wear Nike, to wear Adidas tracksuits, to eat this, eat that, blah, blah, blah. It would make it look like those immigrant families were poorer than the other working class families, white working class families in the area. Do you know what I mean? And only thinking back, I realized that, we were all in the same bubble. Yeah. This person's mum was on income support. I don't know if that still exists now, but something called income support, or this support, that support. This person's mum was a cleaner. This person's mum was a cleaner or a dinner lady. I remember one of my friend's mums was a dinner lady, and my mum was a cleaner. And he said to me like, I saw your mum cleaning, and I was embarrassed. But when I got older, I thought, but your mom was a dinner lady. We're both doing these working class jobs. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you're really coming to, do you know what I mean? So
totally. It's interesting, isn't it? How childhood allows you to see things through this perspective, this lens, and in adulthood allows you to reflect back and think, well, hold on. What did that have to do with anything? Like, we were all in this together. And that is the beauty of of hindsight, of reflection, of that reminds me, because you have spoken to that throughout this conversation, things that have reminded you of an earlier time, or things that have reminded you about your journey through literature, and writing this book. When you won the Desmond Elliott Award, how did that make you feel, Derek, to have your work recognized on that level?
Can I be so honest with you? Yeah.
Yeah, go on. Be honest, please.
I thought they'd made a mistake. I thought you guys, I honestly thought to myself, I thought, oh, maybe they just kind of feel sorry for me or something. But then I spoke to my friends about it, and they was like, Derek, like, can you shut up? Like, just take it. Like, you want, just take it, you know? But I think it's because of obviously the kind of like the way that the culture makes us really kind of internalize this imposter syndrome to the point where it's not even imposter syndrome. It's just, you just doubt yourself all the time.
Yeah.
You just think they must have made a mistake. You know, why have they given me this award, or so on and so forth. But then, yeah, after a while, there were like flashes, like moments, a day or two where I was like, wow, like, you know, I did all right. I did okay, you know. I wish I could go back and show my year 4 teacher my novel now, you know.
Yeah, well, we got to say now, and you do hope in those moments, don't you? All those people that doubted you, like, you know, it's so important to relish those moments and to enjoy them and to embrace them and to celebrate them, Derek, because you have to realize that your writing is profound. It has an impact. It sets you up, you know, to really reflect and think about your place in the literary world, but also as well within, you know, I've got a problem with like role models, but how people perceive you. So, you know, similarly for me, when Nikki had kind of put this event together and she'd spoken about the fact that, you know, Liz, it's going to be you. I was like, what? For real? And it was that the same feeling, like, I'm going to be speaking to Derek about this book that I've been really loving for so long. You do have that kind of, why me? Are you sure it should be me? Should it be somebody else? And it does take a hold of you, this imposter syndrome, or this thing that moves beyond imposter syndrome. It impacts all of us in different ways. But I think there's something to be said about being a Black man in today's climate.
Yes.
And I do want you to speak about how you feel being a Black man in today's climate, being a 32-year-old Black man today, as we approach the end of 2020. How have you felt, Derek?
It's difficult to talk. So if I talk about publishing, it's easier for me. So I can just literally just say, you know, I feel like the publishing industry has a long way to go when it comes to Black British males. I always challenge people that I meet. What was the last novel you read by a Black British male? You know, what was the last book you read by a Black British male? Can you name 5 Black British male novelists? You know, and these are people who are bookish and they can't do that. It tells you there's a problem. For some reason, and I can't put my finger on what the reason is. I think about it all the time, you know. And what's happening right now in terms of Black people in general is amazing, you know. Black British women are doing bits. You know, you've got Candice Carter-Williams selling ridiculous amounts of books, winning awards. Bolu Babalola, which actually Sunday Times. But like, you've got a lot of people doing all these kind of things. But then obviously, I always feel like we move forward obviously as a collective, and this is obviously the Pan-African in me coming out. Move forward as a collective, and I'm just kind of like, well, where are the Sunday Times best-selling Black British male novelists? Where are they? Who was the last one? I think there's been one.
Wow.
Ever. One ever. In terms of fiction.
Yeah.
So I just think, you know, and obviously I work in publishing.
Yes.
And I think I'm probably one of the only Black men in my department. All the other Black men work in IT. You know, I see them and I held them up, you know, I give them a nod and we talk and blah, blah. And I'm like, wow. So you're sitting with them over there, like, wow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like, yeah, there should be more than us.
That representation is important.
Absolutely.
Are you working on anything else then moving forward? What is your next project? Are you working on writing anything else?
Yes, I am currently fine-tuning a poetry collection that I'm writing at the moment, which is based on, a Black British West African immigrant woman coming over to the UK for the first time. One thing that I realized from, kind of trying to talk to my mom and interacting with my aunties and things like that, is that they don't talk about their past. They don't want to talk about it. You ask them questions. So what was it like when you first came over and this, that? They're just like, why are you asking me these questions? Mind your business, none of your business, blah, blah, blah. They don't talk about it. So therefore, there's not a lot of it. There's Buchi Emechata wrote Second Class Citizen, and The Joys of Motherhood and things like that. But it's not a lot of books like that. And she's writing from an immigrant experience coming over, which is amazing. But there's not a lot of books like that out there as well, and of course, because of what's been happening with the Windrush scandal, and even before that, a lot of the history in the UK in terms of Black Britishness is based on the Caribbean. And I felt like, okay, I wanted to contribute something to the West African immigrant experience, so I wanted to write this poetry collection about a young woman who comes over, what she deals with, the challenges that she has, what it's like for, who she meets, who she falls in love with. I can't even imagine any of my aunties, or even the people I call aunties who are not even related to me asking them, so who did you fall in love with when you first came over to the UK? They would never answer that question.
Yeah.
Never. So I just thought, let me just use my imagination and write something.
Oh, I'm so excited for that, Derek, because it sounds like it's going to be another powerful read. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for sharing all that you have shared and for reading those particular parts of That Reminds Me. It's just been such an honor and a privilege to speak to you this evening, and for you to just share so much, considering we haven't met before. We hadn't, had an opportunity to kind of chat about what was gonna happen this evening. But thank you, because you've really kind of brought your whole self to this conversation. And I realized you didn't have to do that. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Nikki, I am inviting you back. Zaz, if you're there, thank you so much, Nikki.
No, I'm speechless. I think Liz, Derek, I think to go to you. I think the beauty of this conversation today, how generous you've been, Derek, with sharing not only case story, but, your own work and your stories. And I think definitely if you could go into teaching, we would definitely get some fresh new writers coming out. And what you said about the imposter syndrome, those of my colleagues who are on the call will definitely say, yeah, Nikki relates to that. But I also feel there's something about the systems in which we are taught in, structural systems that we work in, that kind of feed into that imposter syndrome. And I just think, what you've shared today, and, I was just earlier on when I was speaking to you, Liz, and we were talking about a space and a place for Black British fiction by Black men. And I was like, years ago when I first joined libraries, I remember, doing events with Alex Wheatle and Curtin Newland. And I'm like, I'm glad that they're getting their time now, but why didn't they get their time, 20 years ago? Because they have been writing, for a long time. And Bernard Evaristo, who was joint winner of, was it the Man Booker? And I'm like, even Bernardine, stuff that she's been doing over the years. And it's like, people are slogging away, writing, their guts out, writing these beautiful words, but yet we don't get, space to share their work, and, people don't read it. So, I just thank you both from the bottom of my heart for this conversation. And Derek, I hope when your poetry collection's out, you'll come back, and hopefully we'll be in a better place, physical space, for us to host you. And all I can say is thank you both. And for those people who haven't got a copy of That Reminds Me, do get a copy. And if you're into audiobooks, Liz can vouch for the Audible, because there's a great narrator. Thank you. One of the things I want to do with Beyond Books is, it's great having these events where anyone in the country, anyone in the world can tune in. But back in the neighbourhood, back in Ladywood, where we're doing a lot of neighbourhood work, we want to kind of be quite intentional with the work, the impact of the book. So what I'm hoping to do in the new year is kind of do some poetry workshops based on That Reminds Me, hopefully with Birmingham's Poet Laureate Casey Bailey, if he's listening. Sorry if I've preempted our conversation. But I want to see how people can kind of learn from what you've shared, Derek, and to make it acceptable and make it okay. And I remember last year, one of our closing events at Impact Hub, we hosted JJ Bowler and Mask Off. And, you know, we live in such a toxic kind of society when it comes to men, and particularly Black men, talking about feelings, talking about mental health, talking about those emotions that people don't really want to talk about. And I just think, you know, your book, you know, and the essays that you curated and edited in SAFE are, you know, we need more of that moving into 2021 and forward. I'm just reading, RSSA, maybe we could have a book club. Maybe we can. So, you know, it just remains for me to thank you again, both of you, both Liz and Derek. We've really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we can invite you back to somewhere else. And the chat's going off, so thank you.
Yeah, Derek, I don't know if you can see the chat. I've kind of just logged into the chat and I've seen what's been happening whilst we've been engrossed in conversation, and it's really been positive. Everybody's enjoyed it, and they've thanked us for sharing this conversation with everybody. I forgot that everybody was here. It kind of just felt like we were chatting. So yeah, man, I hope to meet you in the flesh at some point when we've got to the end of this tier 3 or tier 8 or whatever we're on.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
See you later.
See you soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.